Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Truth Talk with Wendy. Today we have a very special guest with us. It is Emily Elizabeth Anderson. Some of you guys may know her. She has got a great following on Facebook. She's been on several interviews talking about her ministry called Thriving Forward. I feel like we are sisters. We have lived very similar lives, but today I finally get to meet her face to face, and we are so excited to have her. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you, Wendy. It's such an honor and privilege to be here. I feel like I've instantly connected with you too, so this is going to be fun. I'm excited about this.
I know. We have so much to talk about. I want our audience, for those who don't know you, I want them to hear directly from you. If you could just give us a little bit about your background and how we got here today.
Yeah. The super short version is I was raised in fundamental patriarchal Christianity. Grew up in a very strict fundamentalist church and school as well, and then started homeschooling when I was 12 with Bill Gothard's program, Advanced Training Institute. And throughout my teen years, I actually became a victim of Bill. He targeted me, groomed me, sexually abused me. And so in 2015, I joined a lawsuit with several other victims against Bill. And we fought in that lawsuit for 5 years until 2020. And that concluded, and throughout that entire process, I was deconstructing and finally discovered what the gospel really was and who Jesus really is, and it completely turned my life upside down. And so I started writing about it, and out of that, a ministry was birthed, and here I am today.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think writing for a lot of us is like a healing. It's like sometimes I think before we were ever allowed to talk about it, or, were brave enough, I guess, to talk about it, that was our only outlet, was writing about it. And it's kind of our way of getting it off our chest, so you don't feel like you're going to explode. Yeah. But the exciting thing about today's day and age is we clearly know we're not alone in this anymore, right? Yeah. I think that's the one. There's a real lot of really bad things about the internet and social media, but I think this is one of the good things, is that it connects people who for so long, fought this battle internally, or in your case, in a lawsuit in court or whatever, and then it's like now you're one of, unfortunately, millions of us that have been through this, and obviously one of the brave ones that is just talking about it very, very transparently, which I think is a gift from the Lord to give other people hope,
Yeah, I am very grateful for the internet's presence and through social media, because coming out of a cult, you leave your entire community, and I have a brand new community now that I have met online, and connections and friendships that I have in a support system. It's, an entirely new world that I would not have discovered prior to the internet. So
yeah, and what a gift, to be able to befriend someone like you, for these other girls that, you've been on the front lines fighting, and, they know they're not alone, and that they have a warrior. It's not like you're two little girls hiding in a closet. They've got somebody out there that has been fighting this battle, which is not easy. It's really not easy. I remember the first time coming forward, I felt like, the rape victim that comes and tells the police 5 years later, and they always say, well, what took her so long to tell? And I'm thinking, man, mine's been way longer than 5 years. No one's going to believe me, right? Yeah. And so it's just so good to know that there are other people that have had those same feelings and same thoughts. And so you have, I think, a couple parts to your story. So I want to get to all of them, but I want to talk about, like, you said you were, in an independent, or in a fundamental church, and you were at a regular school. And
Not
that
regular,
school, I'm assuming,
actually, the school and church were connected. They were one and the same.
Right.
Yeah.
So yes, but like not homeschooled,
yes,
correct?
Private school.
Okay. So it was like where we were, it was like the church and the school on the same like even the same compound, right?
Yes,
Is that
it was
how
the same
yours
building.
was? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Yeah. Okay. So that was until you were in fifth grade, and then you started homeschooling.
Yes.
Okay. So how was everything at home at that point? Like, what was going on at home for you?
It was pretty tumultuous. My parents' marriage was never good, not even from the beginning. And I would say, as I approached about the age of 8, is when I started to spot my dad's narcissism. And I started to realize, even when he was playing with me, he was really more self-absorbed with himself, and everything was really about him. And I started to say things to my mom, like, I don't really think Dad loves me. As an 8-year-old, I could pick up that stuff. And then, and then life really started to fall apart when I was about 10, and just my father had addictions going on, and I found pornography on his computer more than one time. My mother watched him pick up prostitutes. Yes, while I was in my mom's car, we would see up the road ahead my father's vehicle, and we would watch him pick up prostitutes. And he was engaged in quite a bit of wrong behavior, and the stress really started to affect me. And then at about age 11 or 12, his sex addiction turned toward me, and the abuse began. I was molested when I was 12, and it didn't go beyond molestation, but I was definitely targeted and groomed for at least 10 years, all throughout my teenage years and into my early 20s. I always felt preyed upon, and I always knew what it was wrong, even before I knew what sex was. And I know you've talked about this before, Wendy, that you didn't even know what sex was, and yet you knew something was wrong. And I was feeling used and violated, and, like I said, preyed upon, and I knew it was wrong, even though I didn't know all the words and the definitions of exactly what was going on. And I really didn't even fully understand it until I was in my mid-20s and in counseling at that point. But that abuse started pretty early on, and as a result, my little 10-year-old body didn't know what to do with all of this, and I developed a severe life-threatening autoimmune disease called Crohn's disease. And so in the middle of all this abuse, as a teenager, I was also living in and out of hospitals, just barely trying to stay alive. I was, I think my lowest weight was 73 pounds when I was 16. So I looked like a Holocaust victim. You could see every single bone in my body. I was just absolutely deathly ill.
Let me ask you a question about that. At 16, man, that's like the worst age too, because you're so like aware of, the people around you, and were people like, because obviously I don't think you were talking about this at that point at 16. So did people, like other girls, think you were anorexic or things like that? Were they like saying things? Because I'm sure they just like piled on to what you were already going through.
There were definitely some of my mom's friends, even strong friendships that she had, were crumbled because those women thought that I was anorexic and would tell my mother, like, you're not taking care of Emily properly, which is the farthest thing from the truth. I was watched very carefully by many medical professionals. But there was plenty of whispers in our churches, and even strangers all the time would walk up to my mother, like when we were out grocery shopping, and they would give their condolences to her because they thought that I had a terminal illness. I was just so gauntly all the time.
Yeah, that is just a reminder to all of us that, the old adage, you don't judge a book by its cover, but, what in the world could somebody really be going through that you're just making a judgment based on what you're seeing, and it's just not always what it seems, So maybe instead of doing that, maybe we just make a mental note to pray, because it's hard, you just assume something, but somebody that's already gone through so much at 16, and then to have that kind of stuff, I don't know. I just remember 16 was not a good year for me. It's just like, I can't imagine getting that too. Okay, so your abuse just continued by your dad, just continued into your early 20s,
Yes.
correct? So at what point, like what was the straw, like what made that stop for you?
He left the home.
He did.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's a good thing.
And
it
was very sudden. I mean, my parents had been in counseling. There was a brief separation that was mutually agreed upon for my sake, because the tension in the home was so severe. My mom knew that it was making me sicker, and so there was a mutually made decision with the counselor that my father would temporarily be out of the home, which lasted like less than a year, and it would just be so they could continue counseling. And so I would be a little bit removed from that situation. But he finally just got to the point, he had a couple of counselors fire him because they knew he wasn't willing to do any of the work.
That's pretty bad.
Oh yeah.
That is really bad. I've heard of a client firing a counselor, but I've never heard of that. That's crazy.
He was fired by more than one, and others just flat out wouldn't take him because they would do one interview with him, and they were like, they would tell my mom, like, I'm not even going to take him on as a client because he's not willing. He's not willing to do anything. So I guess one year he finally just got fed up and came home one night and said, I have found an apartment and I'm leaving tomorrow. And that was it. He left, took a shower, went to bed, got up the next morning, he was gone. No fight, no nothing.
Yeah.
I was relieved.
Okay, so you're...
I was so relieved.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that first night without him.
Okay,
was
see,
heaven.
that's what I want to ask you, because I'm thinking, okay, you're in your 20s by this point, so you've become an adult and obviously very aware of the damage he's causing you, because I would think that's a normal reaction. I did not have that reaction when I was separated from my dad, so I struggle with myself, like, why do I love this man so much? Like, what is my problem? Of course, that's just another ploy of the enemy. He's trying to make me feel bad about me. But I'm glad to hear that was not another devastating thing for you to have to get over. It was like a relief for you,
I'll never
correct?
Forget that first night, and just being able to come, because normally my bedroom was upstairs, and normally once he arrived home from work, I never went downstairs. I just hung upstairs in my bedroom. I remember walking downstairs, and I went over to the piano. I loved music, and so I played a song, and it was it was 10 o'clock at night, and I'm like, this is so nice. I've never been able to do this before.
Wow. Wow, that is crazy. That's so good. That is so good. Okay, so he's gone, like, never to return, I guess. So the abuse, like, legitimately stopped. So in that time frame, though, is when your mom, removed you from the school and started homeschooling.
Yes, when I was 12
as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So just not real long after all of the stuff started with your dad. Okay, so tell me about that. So you get into homeschooling, or your mom, starts looking into. Of course, I know I homeschooled my kids for 8 years. Thank God, not with any of that crazy material. But I know when you're homeschooling and you've not done it before, you're like on a mission, because you're like, the last thing you can think of, or the only thing you think of is like, they're going to be the dumbest people on the planet. I remember my husband saying to me, Wendy, what is the capital of North Dakota? I'm like, I have no idea. And he's like, this is why you're not homeschooling my children. And I'm like, no, I'm supposed to learn with them, So I got way smarter as I was homeschooling them. But what drew your mom to the ATI program and all of that? And then tell me how that was implemented and what your experience was.
Well, that church that I grew up in, that was also the school. My parents had actually taught. at that school before they had children. They were high school teachers. And so they had been with that ministry for decades and had seen it grow and change. And by the time I had been in that school for a few years, my mom had seen just patterns that she didn't like as far as, I don't know, I had some stressful friendships going on, and she just did not like the direction that the entire ministry was taking. And I think homeschooling was really starting to become pretty popular by then. It was the early 2000s.
Right.
It wasn't quite as weird as it was back in the 80s and even early 90s. Right. So, yeah, and there was just a lot more material, and she was starting to know other families that were homeschooling. So I think she just thought, like, hey, I was a teacher. I can do this. Of course.
Absolutely. Right? More power to her. I was never a teacher. And yes, good for your mom.
I feel sorry for my mother because she was fantastic at laying out a homeschool curriculum and coming up with a whole plan. But I've never been diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, but I'm sure I could probably be. So. And so I feel so sorry for her.
I did not know it was an adult thing. Yes. You can have it as an adult too. Yeah. And I did not know that. I thought you just kind of grew out of it as a kid, but no, you can still have it as an adult.
I was a very difficult student for my mother, for sure. I was distracted by my piano and the cats and the hamster and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. But, they say that the ADHD people rule the world, right? If we can get them out of the house without killing them before they're 18, right, then they eventually rule the world because they're very, very good at everything. They can multitask and all that. So, okay, so that's good. She was a teacher, so she was able to provide a good environment for you to be able to study and do the work, and keep you structured and stuff like that. So she knew about Bill Gothard then because she had already been at this church that kind of condoned that or recommended that, or
she'd heard about him when she was a teenager, because that was back when Bill was doing his huge seminars where he would pack an entire stadium. When he would come to Kansas City, she would go as a teenager. So both my parents were familiar with him. They had been to what Bill calls the basic seminar, which was his main seminar. They had been to that. They had been to the advanced seminar. So I would say they just had a familiarity with it. I do know there was another family acquaintance that was officially enrolled in ATI, and they made the personal recommendation to my mom.
Gotcha. Okay. So you started that in 5th grade, and how did that go?
Well, the very first conference that we ever went to, the way ATI was structured is you have family conferences that you go to every year. And before we joined, there was one giant one in Knoxville every year. And then by the time we had joined, they split them up into smaller conferences spread throughout the U.S. So people had, options of what time of year to go.
Right.
And how they could go to whatever is closest to them. But then IBLP would also put on additional conferences of different topics. And so they had this one conference called the Total Health Conference. And here I had been just diagnosed just months before. And so my mom thought this would be a great place to learn, like maybe some biblical principles to health or whatnot, whatever they were touting. So that was the first conference I went to, and I was 13. And a couple days into the conference, I was walking down the hallway. It was an empty hallway, and it was just me walking down, and then Bill turns the corner, and he's walking the opposite direction toward me. And he stops me in the hallway and says, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I took horseback riding lessons at the time and horsemanship training. So I said, "I want to train horses." And he just nodded and said, "Okay," and walked off. And then later that night, my mother and I were informed from a staff member that we had been personally requested to sit at Bill Gothard's head table during the dinner gathering. because all the conference attendees all had dinner together in this large conference room. And we were asked to sit at Bill's table. And that's when the grooming began. He was extremely flirtatious with me in front of your whole table. The whole table had like 10 or 12 people at it. And he gushed over me and would say to everybody else, like, oh my gosh, isn't she just so beautiful? Doesn't she have the most amazing smile? Don't you love her laugh? I mean, it was so uncomfortable. I don't know how anybody didn't see that this is wildly inappropriate.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm just putting myself at that table and I'm just like, oh my gracious. Yeah.
At that point, mid-70s, and I'm 13. And he informs my mother. He said, well, Emily told me she wants to train horses when she grows up, but we need to change that from training horses to training men. And I think what she meant by training men would be like making disciples, essentially like become a fisher of men.
Okay. I'm like, I'm going to need a little bit more than that. Yeah. That is crazy. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
And basically it was his way of informing my mother that I see something special in your daughter and she needs to do lifelong ministry. Period. End of story.
Wow.
And
at 13, after one conversation in a hallway.
And he then asked how old I was, and I said I was 13. He asked when I was going to turn 14, because he said, we have a team called the Great Expeditions Team. And they were a ministry team. I think all the members lived up at headquarters in Chicago. And they would travel with Bill. I don't think there were maybe like a couple dozen of these teenagers, and they would travel the world with Bill and do international ministry with him. And he said, you have to be 14 to join. So when you're 14, I want you to move up to headquarters permanently, just me. So that would be me quitting school as a 14-year-old and leaving home pretty much permanently and just moving up to headquarters and doing ministry with him.
So just to be clear, there are other 14-year-olds that do this, and their parents have signed off on that.
And I mean, I think a lot of those kids, they'll come back and visit home maybe for a couple of months, but it is not uncommon to have teenagers, even as young as 14 or 15, that are living up at headquarters for years at a time.
Okay, and just to be clear, these aren't like troubled children. Like they're not out of boarding school because their parents can't control them, or you know what I'm talking. Like the lesser roll-off homes and those like that. Not like that.
Is Bill would spot so-called troubled teenagers. They weren't really troubled, but he would spot what he thought was a troubled teenager, and he would never have them invited to headquarters. He would have them sent to one of his many training centers, which were usually old hotels that IBLP had taken ownership of, and that's where they would like host conferences and things. And so a lot of teenagers were sent off to live at training centers for long periods of time, just to get to work, basically, to become free labor, and to, so-called be discipled there.
So you're invited to be one of these very special children traveling the globe with the leader of mankind, and your mom is okay with that, or she's like absolutely not, or what was your discussion with her? Like, mom, can I go? Or
and she told him pretty much there at the table. She went around it and said, she was just diagnosed with Crohn's, and Crohn's disease in third world countries don't really mix well. So let's get her healthy, and we will talk about it when she gets a bit healthier. But I know also she was thinking, not only is this not a good idea for health, but she thought, my daughter is in school and she can't go off and do full-time ministry until she graduates from school. So,
Which he should have known that because you were at a
Right.
homeschool conference. Right? I mean, that's like not hard. Okay. So you get out of that, obviously. And then what happens?
Well, he, at the end of the conference, we had this weird interaction where he pulled aside one of his girls, and I say girls as in not a biological child. Bill did not have any biological children, but he had quite a group of young teenagers around him.
I did not know he did not
He's
have his
never
own
been-
children.
he's never
Is
been
that true?
married.
Wow.
He's never been married, never been a father,
wow.
and built an entire
Wow.
ministry on teaching marriage and parenting advice.
Wow. That, okay, I gotta process that for a second. What in the world? Like, really? That is
Yeah.
crazy to me. Yeah, how do you take advice? It's like I wouldn't go to a Catholic priest to get marriage counseling,
We
right?
thought he was a prophet. I mean, it
don't-
didn't
I
matter
don't-
if he was married or not. We thought he was a prophet.
Okay, was that the claim? He was a prophet.
Not outright, but it was very common in ATI for him to be referred to as the modern day Apostle Paul.
Wow.
So we didn't
Wow.
really outright call
Wow.
him a prophet, but we
Okay.
saw him at that level of having having a
as a
Paul,
Paul.
or as having divine revelations from God, and just having this
Wow.
connection with God that no other man has.
Wow, okay. Well, and if you're doing that, if you're looking at him like that, I mean, Paul was very clear about marriage and stuff in the Bible, so that would have given him that authority, I guess, in people's eyes. So, okay.
But anyway,
Okay.
the women that the young girls and women that he singled out they kind of have a nickname of the Gothard girls. So when I say, he had one of his girls next to him. And he
Right.
told her that, and he's pointing to me in this conversation, and he said, so this Emily, she's going to join the Great Expeditions group in a few months once she turns 14. So you get down her phone number and information and keep in contact with her. And then he looked at this girl straight in the eyes and pointed his finger at her and shook it, and he said, don't you let this one go. And I just had chills run down my back.
Yeah.
And I have plenty of assumptions
Wow.
of what all that meant. But I mean, it was obvious.
Sure.
And I saw it multiple times as a teenager. Bill would use his own, the girls that were around him that worked for him, he would use them to snack others. And it's sickening to see it all play out now.
Well, there's somebody else that just went to jail recently for doing that exact job. That's unbelievable. That is unbelievable. I don't know. I'm just like, I'm just wondering where the parents are of the girls that he had in this group. Like what would make a parent agree that, or think that that's a good
Just
idea.
reverence.
Maybe it was like
and
an
that's
honor.
What I said.
Yeah,
Being asked to come work at headquarters was the highest honor in ATI. And so most parents didn't blink an eye because they just thought it was the safest place on earth. They thought there is no other person who's going to be able to give biblical instruction to my teenager in the way that Bill can. I mean, they just saw it as an incredible, safe opportunity for their child to be discipled by one of the great biblical scholars of all history.
Wow, that is just a sad reality. And unfortunately, I totally agree that is a possibility because at our church, our family would have been the safest family for any child to come spend the night, and that just wasn't the truth. It just was the perception, so. Wow. Okay. So, so you're 13 still at this point. Okay. So how long were you in ATI? How long did that last?
I would say, officially until I was 18, until I graduated.
Okay.
Throughout my teenage years, we would attend the conferences every year, and Bill would continue to spot me every year, and he would insist that I needed to come and work at headquarters. He would talk about how I was so special and so unique, and I had this light inside of me, and that God had chosen me to do work, and that God had chosen Bill and I to work together. And Bill would use language of, you are my energy giver, I love you, God's placed a special love in my heart for you, and we are meant to do work together, and just all this very flirtatious, inappropriate language.
Inappropriate.
Yeah. And yeah.
That's the only word I can use in this family-friendly broadcast. Yeah. Yeah, I have some others, but I'll keep those to myself. Yeah, that is a level of manipulation and perversion that is it just makes me physically sick to my stomach.
With more intense physical, sexual grooming, and so there was lots of brushing of my hair, and even gripping like the hair with the nape of my neck, and rubbing my shoulders, constantly holding my hands, never letting go of my hands, as if we were some obsessed boyfriend, girlfriend or something. It grossed me out. I did not like it. Playing footsie.
Yeah.
Touching my thighs, getting very, very close to me. He would have erections, and he would sit across from me and have his legs very open, and so I could see what was going on, and I would just, all of that is, yeah.
Is there any possibility that, he's like in his 70s. Was he with it mentally? Like, did he, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying to understand if there's like any possibility he's just lost his ever beloved mind. But this is in the midst of
it depends on what you consider lost your mind.
He is clearly lost a portion of his brain, but
he is.
Okay, yeah. Well, because this is not like after he's retired and he's off, drooling at the retirement home. This is in the midst of him still doing these seminars, and everybody's like worshiping him as the end all be all of Christian, hierarchy people. Okay, so because there's so much that I've heard, like, people that get dementia, they've never said a cuss word in their life, and they'll just start cussing, and you're like, wait, where? You don't even know that word, but I'm like, how?
In place.
Yeah, it just is so, it's almost like they're, and tell me if this is your experience, because I want to talk to you about something you and I discussed right before film, because he's clearly not alone in his journey of manipulation and perversion and all of that. And in his case, he didn't stand behind a pulpit, but he stood on a stage. But there's a lot of that going on by men who stand behind a pulpit and call themselves, men of God. So, but like what I guess the level of brazenness comes from getting away with it over and over and over and over and over again. No accountability. It just continues to empower. And then this isn't enough, so you got to move it a little bit further, and then you got to move it a little bit further. Has that been your experience as well? Not just with Bill Gothard, but maybe in anybody else because I also feel like I have like a bullseye or something on my forehead that makes me a target for predators because I've been molested, and I just feel like there's, I don't know, it's like we just have some kind of glow or something, like they can see us coming. I don't know why it's like that, but it just seems to be.
I'm almost done with this book called Predators by Anna Salter, and it's a very chilling book. You got to take it little bit by a little
Really?
bit, and don't read it at night before you go to bed. But the entire book, I mean, the subtitle
know.
is like child molesters, rapists, sadists, and other offenders. So it's an entire book of this woman who has studied these offenders and these predators for years and has done interviews with a lot of offenders that are in prison. And she's gotten into the mind of these child molesters and these rapists and sadists. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, it's very creepy. But I'm few statistics that shocked me. The average child molester has between 50 and 150 victims before they're found out. And, you know, most likely a lot more afterwards.
Yeah.
And reading these interviews
Right.
that she did with these predators, they talk about how much they work to gain not only the trust of the child, but the trust of the community around them and the parents, any family around the child. And so they
Wow.
some offenders in their interviews did mention that they could spot children with certain, I guess you'd call them weaknesses, where there was either within the child they were struggling with something, or there was a broken family around them, something that made them an easy target. Yeah,
Like a missing
something,
father or something like that.
the predator thought would make the child an easier target. But then, they also worked very hard to make sure that their reputation was so solid in the community that if a child ever began to speak out, the child would be instantly doubted.
Yep.
Yes, and you
Discredited,
start to have
yeah.
this pattern
Yeah.
where these predators would admit that they got more gutsy over time. They felt more confident the more times that children started to speak out and they weren't believed. The predators started to feel invincible.
Wow. I'll tell you what, I feel like I need a shower. I'm just like, I'm heating up over here. I can feel myself sweating. This kind of stuff just like, it literally fires me up because it's so bizarre. And I know you're recently married, so you don't have children yet. And, but I can tell you, because I was 11 when this started with me and my dad. And for the longest time, it was easy for me to believe, something's wrong with me. This is why, he did this. Like, something's weird about me, or something's wrong with me. When I became a mom, my whole perspective, I mean, it changed everything. And I do believe that's why God wants us to refer to him as our father, because when I think about how much I love my kid and then how much he loves them more than I do, which is hard for me to believe. I always tell my kids I'm running a close second. I may not love you as much as God, but I'm running a close second. But then he has had to teach me, but Wendy, I love you that much too, right? And that's hard as a victim who's been abused like that by their father. It's hard for them to think of themselves like that, like we're not that valuable. So when I hear these things, I can just see the pictures of the faces of my children, and it is a whole nother level of infuriatedness, if that's a word. I make up words on this podcast, and that's gonna be a new one. But I mean, literally, my daughter said to me one time, because I say, now, if anybody hurts you, Mommy will kill first and ask questions later, And my 9-year-old came to me one day. She said, Mommy, when you say you'll kill first and ask questions later? And I said, yes, ma'am. And she said,
Ask
okay, well,
questions
if you
later.
kill them, how are you going to ask them questions? Because they'll be dead. And I said, okay, I need to clarify. I'm killing them. I'm going to ask questions of everybody else, So she just wasn't getting it. But she knows. Like, she knows if anybody hurts her, my mom has got my back, and I never had that growing up. So anyway, it's just crazy. I want to get that book, and we will put the link to that book in our our show notes.
And
and
a
disclaimer:
trigger warning,
don't read it
to
at night.
Any survivor
And a
reading
trigger
it,
warning, yes.
I would say you need to be at a pretty healed spot to be able
Right.
to read it, because there are some very,
Right.
very graphic
Right.
descriptions of abuse in that book. So, but if you can handle
Wow.
it, it is a really
Yeah.
eye-opening book, very stunning.
Yeah, I love the fact that she's talked to them directly, because that is the key to understanding how they do it and why they do it, because you gotta like, get to it from both ends. You can't just try to help the victim when you've got the pedophile who has between, like you said, 50 and 150 victims. The last statistic I heard was 108, so, it wouldn't surprise me if it was higher than that now. But, for every one victim that you can rehabilitate, if that's even possible, I don't even know if it is, but if it is, you've saved how many kids, right? So, man, that is just crazy. Okay, so let's talk about thriving forward, because clearly that's what we all want to do, right? We all want to move forward and thrive while we do it. So you have, been to hell and back and survived it, and still have a relationship with Jesus, probably better than you did when this all started, right? Because you said you really learned about the gospel after the whole craziness, right? So tell me about that journey. Like, what led you to get, like, personally, like, in the trenches and get involved with and found your ministry?
After years of grooming, I did finally end up at headquarters. When I was 18, my mom and I went up there just for 10 days. And that's all it took. But we went up there to have what we were going to consider counseling for our family. And he was just very insistent once we arrived that my mom needed to go home and I needed to live there. And so we basically battled it out for 10 days. And just finally, my mom and I said, okay, if you're not going to yield, then we've just got to go home. So we did. But about 6 months after we arrived home, I came across a website called Recovering Grace. And this website was founded by adults that had grown up in ATI and had come out of it and had come to realize that it was a cult. And so there was a variety of content on this website. There were theological arguments for what was wrong, what was wrongly taught in ATI, and there was also just a lot of stories from students, ex-students, about their growing up years. And I happened upon this website, not searching for it, but came across it, and the top story was titled Sexual Harassment at Headquarters. And I clicked on it, shocked, thinking that maybe some girl got attacked on her way to headquarters or something. That's what you think when you think of that, at least in my brain at the time. But instead, I read this story from this woman who basically went through the same thing that I did and was groomed by Bill for several years. And then she spent more time actually working at headquarters and had even more experiences with him. But just reading her story, and she ended it by explaining what the laws were for what sexual harassment looks like. And she said, I believe that the behavior that Bill exhibited fits what the law states is considered sexual harassment. So reading that story, I just got goosebumps and realized, wow, I'm not the only one. And at that point, I didn't even realize what had happened to me. I just knew that Bill had been very stubborn and was insisting on impossible things. But reading that article really is what kicked the door wide open. And within a couple years of that is when I joined the lawsuit with 18 other victims. We had 19 total. And It is.
So is that done now? That whole, it is, okay. Is that a good outcome for you?
It's not the outcome that
pleased,
we wanted. We were not able to press criminal charges, so we went through civil court. And we had originally filed against Bill and against the board members because we believe the board members are negligent because they knew of allegations and did not take action when they should have. And we ended up, that lawsuit ended up coming to a close in 2018, the plaintiffs actually voluntarily withdrew the lawsuit, just because of a lot of legal complexities, and we realized we were not able to take it as far as we wanted. And, our attorneys were very frank with us and said, you have a lot of emotional turmoil ahead. And you want to make sure it's worth it.
Yeah.
Because
it's a big...
And that's what I wish people would understand.
Absolutely.
When people make comments like, well, why can't she just report? Well, if he really did that to her, why doesn't she hold him accountable? Unless you've been through it, you do not understand the cost involved. And I'm not talking financial. Yes,
absolutely.
there's financial, but I am talking the emotional cost. Your entire life gets turned down.
Yeah.
I had to turn over all of my texts, emails, my journals, all of my journals where I had written all my private thoughts for all my years. I had to turn those over to Bill's legal team, which means Bill had access to them. Your entire life becomes, if it's a big case, you become scrutinized in the media. We had entire websites that were started just to discredit the plaintiffs. We were under a microscope. We were told that, Bill's attorneys, if we got to trial, they would find anything they could in our history. If we had anything that we were just the slightest bit not proud of in our history, it would come up, and because that's what a perpetrator has to do in order to be able to get off, to get scot-free. They have to make the person making the allegations, they have to make them into the enemy. And so we were told to prepare for that, and eventually, we made a decision, and we chose to withdraw. Bill, a month later, opened the case back up and filed sanctions against us, which is monetary punishment. And so he claimed that our lawsuit was frivolous, and that we had put him through emotional hellfire, and we should have to pay him for it. So we split it all up. It was like about $20,000 a piece, 20,000, something like that. So we had to fight that for 2 more years. And we did
Unbelievable.
We did end up in Chicago testifying before a judge, all the plaintiffs. And that court day was good because in the end, the judge did rule in the women's favor. And he said he believed that the lawsuit was not frivolous and that the women were credible. So, it doesn't mean that... No.
And then they put him under the jail?
It just simply meant that we did nothing wrong in filing our lawsuit. The judge's ruling does not give any bearing to Bill's innocence or guilt, because that part of the lawsuit was over. So there's nothing that shows that he did or did not do this.
Wow.
But at least the women were told by a judge that he found us credible and we did nothing wrong in filing our suit. And if you're in the legal system at all, you know that this is not an uncommon end to lawsuits. I mean, it's very, very common for them to end prematurely. It's very, very rare for lawsuits to actually get all the way to a trial. So it doesn't mean that those who filed it are taking it back. They're recalling their statements. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means there's legal complexities that make the world messy, Yeah.
Right, yeah. Because of high-powered lawyers that get lots of money from people that are going to go to any extreme to CYA, and that is gross and disgusting in itself. But I will guarantee you, as a fellow victim, it speaks volumes to me, just the fact that the judge didn't just go, okay, case dismissed. Like, they made a point to say, absolutely, these women are totally credible, and you get nothing from them. And, now, like, the flesh in me wants to go, okay, Okay, so while you're on a roll, can we just go and refile here? Can we just try on the other side? Can we just try that right here? We're kind of liking you, you know. But I mean, that's what that means. And it wouldn't surprise me if the judge was like, maybe like winking, like, hey guys, you know, if y'all want to refile, you probably do have a case here. You know, it just, it's so sad to me the way our system is, because it is not for the victim. It's just not. It is for the high powered, whoever has the most money, you know? And it's just
innocence until proven guilty. That simply means that those who make the allegations are assumed to be lying until you know the party that you're making accusations against are assumed innocent until proven guilty.
Well, and I've and you probably know this. I don't know if you work more with children or adults in your ministry, which I want to talk about, but in all the children that I have worked with, I mean, children don't have, because I know, being the victim of it, I didn't have language to explain what was going on, like you said too. So when the children that we're talking to are saying the things that they're saying, there's no way you don't believe them. Like they don't just come up with that without having that experience or seeing things they shouldn't see.
If you read that book, you'll know otherwise. It's awful. It's awful. The descriptions that some children will use that are just like, there's absolutely no denying that this is extreme abuse going on, and yet fancy attorneys can come up with any excuse to be able to get their client off. It's really sad. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It is. That is sad. Yeah. It's sad for the kids that are going through it, you know, and yeah, that's when you like shows like what's the new one I was watching, Terminal List, where the guy, the Navy SEAL, like he holds everyone accountable. That's wrong, Tim. You know, I'm thinking, why can't we just do that? You know, I'm going to hire that guy. Just give him a list of names, right? You know, but yeah, you just, you know, it's the system that we have, and it's corrupt. Thankfully, those of us who believe that, you know, God says justice and revenge is mine, right? And I wish he would have said before you get to heaven. This is not in there, you know. So I know that we don't necessarily get that on this side, you know, but it's just why I'm, you know, vigilant, as I'm sure you are too, and motivated to tell as many people. So tell me about what your work is in Thriving Forward. You know, what's
after the lawsuit,
what led you to
concluded, I was actually Jane Doe 3 throughout the entirety of the lawsuit, and life. Okay. You know, life and circumstances changed throughout the lawsuit, and I grew as a person. And by the time it concluded, I no longer felt like I needed to be anonymous. I had gained a new support system, and originally I had actually filed to be anonymous because I didn't want my dad to know that I was in the lawsuit, and I didn't want him to know. But
your dad?
through some unethical practices, he was informed that I was in the lawsuit. So my main reason for being anonymous went out the window. Wow. So I decided, you know what? I've got nothing else to lose at this point. Let me tell the world. So the day that we withdrew was the day that I went public with my name. And the support I received
good for
was
you.
Enormous. I never would have imagined the kind of support that I had received.
Wow.
And because I was no longer hidden under this veil, I decided to start writing just through Facebook on my personal page. And then I realized that some of my friends probably don't want to read all that. So I decided to start a page.
Right, you're totally depressing me, Emily.
I started
know.
Forward.
Yeah.
And
oh my goodness.
We officially,
I get that.
I say we, my husband and I, officially picked our name for it in January 2020, and right now I am in the process of getting some certifications to better equip myself as an advocate. I would like to be able to eventually become a coach, to where I'm actually able to take on some clients, women that are in desperate situations that need wise counsel and advice and an advocate to fight for them, and to someone to be able to point them to resources of people that are higher up than me, that they need local resources to them or attorneys or whatnot.
Wow.
I am constantly educating myself to become a better advocate. I write daily on Thriving Forward, work with other advocates that I've connected with online, and we just work on being a voice for those that are not yet able to use their own voices, and to fight for those that are still in the trenches of their own abuse, and to hopefully help victims find their voice, find their legs, find freedom, and then they can use their voice to help others.
Well, so you're helping them to
If they
not
choose.
be anonymous
Yeah.
anymore, Yeah, because so many people, I think that they're so afraid if people knew, what would they think? And, like you said, you got such overwhelming support. And I think that's the day and age that we are in now, that, that people are believing them, and people want to help if they can, but who better than somebody who's walked in their shoes, so, man, that's amazing. Is there any part of your ministry or your story that we have not talked about? I know we've been around Egypt and back, because there's so many similarities with us, but is there anything else that our viewers would want to know, or that you want them to know?
Off the top of my head. There are resources, though. I would tell to any victims listening right now, there are so many resources available. Like I said, I've worked side by side with many other advocates, and there's a beautiful online community where everyone specializes kind of in their own thing. There's ministries that focus exclusively on betrayal trauma that you experience mostly within marriage. There are ministries that help mothers that have left, and they are having to not only survive divorces, but also trying to help their traumatized children in the midst of all of that, while they themselves are still traumatized, And so there's
trying to figure it out themselves and be a mom at the same time.
Spouses that are married to sexual addicts, there's so many beautiful ministries out there to help victims, and online communities, some that really help to keep a victim safe when they're not in a situation where they can talk about their story publicly online. There's a lot of great resources that are very, very private to help victims. So I just now is there's no better time to be able to receive the help and support that someone needs to be able to get out of a traumatic situation and to be able to experience long-term healing too. And that's why I picked Thriving Forward, because I didn't want people to just survive their trauma. I wanted them to be able to thrive afterwards, and to be able to move forward in their life, and to be able to continually grow as new things come up in their life, whether they are just married or they're just now a parent. And those things, they trigger they bring up triggers, and they trigger trauma that you didn't realize that you had. Maybe you thought, I thought I was healed from this. And then something else comes up in life changes, and you realize, I have more healing to do. It's a never ending journey, of healing from this.
My husband calls it the gift that keeps on giving. I'm like, that is a good way to look at it, I guess. But it doesn't feel like a gift sometimes. But it is when you can then turn around and use that to help other people and, point people to the Lord. So I am so happy that our paths cross, and that God put us together. And I am going to link all of your websites and your Facebook group and everything in our show notes. And then I'm assuming if people are listening and they are in, say, one of those categories like you were just describing, can they find some of those resources on your site? Or are those things you need to send us, or is it all on your site?
My favorite resources. My husband is currently building my actual website.
That'd be great.
So I don't have resources up on my website. I'm doing all of my writing exclusively through Facebook right now. But I'm consistently sharing resources on my Facebook, so that's a great place to start. But then I'll add some names here in the show notes of some great places to go.
That'd be great. Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that. And I am so glad that you guys tuned in today. I hope you guys have been as blessed as I have. It is so good to know that we don't walk this journey alone. You know, that is what the enemy wants you to believe. And that is what I believed for years. And I still sometimes find myself thinking that way, and so it makes you want to isolate because you feel alone, so you just are going to be alone and have your little pity party. But that is not where the that's where the enemy wants you. It is not where the Lord wants you. And it is when this stuff gets brought up to the surface that the light of Jesus can shine on it, and that's where the healing begins. So I just want to encourage everybody today, even if you're sitting there and you haven't talked to anybody about this, check out the show notes, go check out Emily's website or her Facebook page. And if you're in one of those categories, you can get help. You don't have to walk through this alone. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today.